Dear class, welcome back to State and Local Government. This week, you guys are going to analyze some data, and so I wanted to go over how this is going to happen. So let's look at tables, maps, graphs. So we will use a lot of pictures, graphs, maps, tables, etc., to talk about demographics, right? And data. Tables are a type of representation of data that is more common to students. Data is put into a set of columns. Each column represents different quantities, right? So here's an example of a table. In the balance sheet stuff, you might see certain kinds of setup like this. Items, on one side might be the year of the item, and then on the other side, they might have income tax, sales tax, other kinds of items. So what you do, you want to understand what the value of the income tax was in year 2020. It's where they intersect, the row and the column intersect, right? If I want to know the sales tax for the year 2020, I go for the intersection. So this is 400. If I want to know what the corporate tax is for 2020, I go for the intersection, right? Likewise, if I want to know what the estate tax was in 2021, it's the intersection. So this is how we use the tables. Graphs. So many of you also know that what graphs are. Usually they plot one quantity on the vertical axis, which we usually call the y-axis, and another quantity on the horizontal or x-axis. They show how these two quantities are related to each other. We might see a line, scatter plot, or box chart or something, right? We can change how we represent these. Let's take a look at a chart. So rather, the graph here is showing you on the y-axis or the horizontal axis, aging. And usually they will say years, months, or something, right? So this is not say age in, but age. So this will be in years or months, right? And then on the other side, it will show something like, oh, okay, so now I understand what's happening. It is aging, actually. How much does a person age with time? So you might ask, what does this mean? So as they're aging, as time passes, they will start to look older and older, right? And so we assume that there is a direct relationship between time and age, how a person looks, right? As far as their body and everything. Do they look like they are young or do they look old, right? So we assume that as time passes, a person actually ages. Let's look over here. Sometimes we plot money on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. For here, you might have US federal government spending on education over time. And so you might put data in and do some activity on Excel, and it plots out some kind of a line. So let's see if I can plot a line here. So maybe it will show you a straight line. Maybe it will show you a curved line. So maybe the relationship will be kind of different like that, right? So this will vary. Here we have something called a box plot. These lines are, instead of lines, we see boxes, right? So if you look at COVID-related deaths by age group, you might see that there were very few deaths for people younger than 10, and then suddenly the death seems to be guaranteed, or rather very high, if the age of the person who had COVID was over a certain age, like 50 or 60 or something, right? So this is one way of representing it. These are called box plots. Pie chart. Sometimes you want to see what the proportion is, how something is comprised of. For example, you may want to see how much money goes into education versus healthcare versus construction. at the local level, right? And so when you plot it, it might look like this, that the city government allocates 50% of its budget on construction, 30% to public schools, 20% to salaries, like that, right? Lastly, a lot of maps are used, right? Maps are just some kind of a pictorial representation of a country or city or town or even just a small area. So there are tons and tons of charts that we'll be looking at, right? So these are just useful. Sometimes you can actually enter data on maps and then create maps of things. So let's stop here for this lecture. The idea was to talk to you about the type of figures, tables, and things like this.